The French Revolution, the fight that started it all.
When you hear about the French Revolution, you probably think about angry peasants, cake, and head chopping. But that's not all that happened. From 1789 to 1793, French commoners marched, fought, and rioted through the streets of Paris, fighting for their rights to a better rule. The current monarchy of France, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, had filled their responsibilities as rulers, leaving their country in financial despair. The French commoners protested for human and political rights, eventually creating one of the first modern democracies in Europe, inspiring other successful revolts for years to come.
The French Revolution originated in 1787 after France aided the 13 American colonies in defeating the British, their longtime enemy, where they were pushed to the edge of bankruptcy. The increasing population, failed crops, and Rousseau, Voltaire, Diderot, and Montesquieu's writings enlightening commoners, this created the perfect storm for a revolt against the struggling French monarchy. Therefore, Louis XVI created a new government, the Estates General, composed of the clergy, the nobles, and the commoners. However, the Estates General realized that the Third Estate, which was composed of commoners, could outvote everyone if they voted by head because there were 600 commoners, 300 of the clergy, and 300 of the nobles. On the other hand, voting by estate could give an unfair advantage to the other two estates. Amidst this frustration, the commoners, also known as the Third Estate, broke off and declared themselves the National Assembly, and threatened to proceed without the other two. This action was supported by many parish priests, and they outnumbered the upper clergy who were part of the church's deputies. This new government wanted more say in the government and a better supported monarchy for the majority of the French population, the commoners. When the deputies were locked out of their meeting hall on June 20th, they swore an oath to not disperse until there was a new constitution. This happened in the king's indoor tennis court called Jeu de Paume. When the king gave in, he recommended nobles and the reigning clergy to join the assembly, which was named the National Constituent Assembly on the 9th of July. However, once it formed, the king started gathering troops to disperse it, and sadly for him, this was spread as a rumor throughout Paris.
Because of this rumor, the Great Fear of 1789 started, which is a period of time where commoners were starving and scared, because troops were everywhere in Paris. This took a turn on July 14, 1789, when French commoners stormed the Bastille, a state prison fortress. During this event, only a few prisoners were released, but French commoners acquired 250 barrels of gunpowder. This was a turning point in the revolution. This event is so important that it's now become a national holiday in France called Bastille Day. Because of this violent event, the States General approached the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and of the Citizen, which granted liberty, equality, the right to resist oppression, and the inviolability of property. However, these revolutionary changes were so new and unimaginable as the king declined these propositions. The king was neglecting his responsibilities as rulers of his country. This angered the commoners and caused a procession of women and a few men to storm Versailles on October 5, 1789. They broke into the palace, and the crowd successfully demanded the royal family for bread and for them to move to Paris. This act was necessary because while France was in debt and the French commoners were starving, Marie Antoinette was spending the French people's taxes on unnecessary lavish fashion and parties, making messy plays in politics, which made her even more of a hated figure. The National Assembly forced the king to continue to draft a new constitution and tried to appease the people of France by abolitioning feudalism, establishing civil equality among men, and allowing more than half of the adult male population to vote, and a pretty minor number of those males met the requirements to become a deputy. Because of this act, the French already achieved two of their coveted rights, civil and political, but to the commoners that was not enough. When the National Constituent Assembly tried to advocate for a new monarchical regime, where legislative and executive powers were shared by the king and the Assembly, Louis XVI proved he was indeed weak as a king, and tried to escape France on June 20th to 21st in 1791, but was brought back to Paris from Varennes.
Many counter-revolutionaries fled or emigrated and formed armed groups near the northeastern frontiers of France. They sought help from the other rulers of Europe, and at first they turned a blind eye on the revolution. But when the National Constituent Assembly publicized the principle of national law, which is essentially the idea that people had the right of self-determination, which means forming your own state and choosing your own government, they started getting worried. On April 20, 1792, France declared war with Austria because the King of France, Louis XVI, believed that it would strengthen or even save his authority, or allow foreign armies to save him. On August 10, 1792, revolutionaries went to Tuileries Palace to successfully imprison the royal family in Temple Prison, because they believed the monarchy was betraying them. At the beginning of September, a Parisian crowd broke into the prison and killed the nobles and clergy who were held there. However, at the same time, with their senses of nationalism awakened, volunteers were flowing into the army. France suffered many defeats but won the war in the end. On September 20, 1792, a new assembly called the National Convention met, and the next day abolitioned monarchy and proclaimed the start of the Republic. The convention judged Louis XVI, and despite the Girondins' efforts, a political group composed of lawyers and businessmen who supported the king, was executed by guillotine on January 21, 1793. Marie Antoinette was also executed by guillotine and was executed on October 16, 1793. Her kids died in Temple Prison in Paris, marking the end of the French monarchy.
Girondin leaders were traced from the National Convention, leaving the Montagnards and the Paris Sans-Culottes, who were composed of workers, craftsmen, and shopkeepers. The Montagnards took power and they introduced the idea of the maximum. This taxed the rich, gave national census to the poor and disabled, and made education free and the law. They also ordered the seizure and sale of property of immigrants. These new laws provoked violent oppositions, but all oppositions were stopped by the Reign of Terror.
During the Reign of Terror, French people were sentenced to death and executed if they said or did anything that was supposedly counter-revolutionary. Sometimes they were even executed without a trial or they died in prison. This period of time started on September 5, 1794 and ended on July 27, 1794. There were at least 30,000 suspects and 17,000 were killed by execution where a trial was given, while others were killed without a trial or died in prison. Maximilien Robespierre was the one who advocated for the restrictions and was overthrown in the National Convention on July 27, 1794, and was executed July 28, 1794. Soon after he was executed, the maximum was abolished and the National Convention began to make a new constitution.
The French Revolution's changes impacted many things around the world and in the political aspect as well. Their successful revolt inspired other nearby countries like Belgium to protest against their monarchies. French monarchy did not end immediately because Napoleon would eventually become the emperor, but they were successful with the execution of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, gaining the French people freedom of speech and press, and women now had the right to divorce. Unfortunately, though, not everything was so positive. The Catholic Church was now scrutinized because that was the king's religion, and many nobles had been hunted and massacred. Some change also happened slowly over time, like slaves being freed in France's overseas colonies like Haiti, and the new constitution, the Declaration of the Right of the Man and of the Citizen. The French Revolution involved many rights and responsibilities, but we should also remember it because it shows how a group of hungry commoners can make a difference and fight for their proper rights when responsibilities are failed. It became one of the first modern democracies in Europe, and like the historian Jeremy Popkins said in his book about the French Revolution, A New World Begins, the French Revolution is a laboratory in which all of the possibilities of modern politics, both positive and negative, were tested for the first time. He also said the French Revolution remains a vital part in the heritage of democracy.
From 1789 to 1793, French commoners turned into French revolutionaries fighting for now basic rights and a new rule. The late monarchy of France failed to fulfill its responsibilities as rulers and paid the worst price. The French commoners protested for civil rights, eventually creating the first modern-day democracy in Europe. The French Revolution caused a permanent change in history because France has now been a democracy for over 200 years. There will certainly not be a monarchy there for a while. It's important for people to know about it because it's an inspiring real-life story of how anyone can impact their country in a positive way from the ground up, and the French system inspired many other countries, including the US, in their own governments.